I'll tell you what, about 8 years ago, I planted a row of garlic in October, walked away, and didn't touch it again until June. Pulled up 60 fat heads from a bed I'd basically ignored. That got me thinking about which vegetables actually reward you for leaving them alone and which ones punish you for it. So I sat down and put together 20 of them, 20 vegetables you can plant, walk away from, and come back to a real harvest. I narrowed this list down to crops I've personally grown in my own backyard. No exotic stuff, no special equipment. And the one sitting at number 1? It's a vegetable most folks already have in their fridge right now, and they have no idea it's the laziest crop in the garden. Now here's how I put this list together. Every single one of these crops is something I've grown myself, in my own backyard, in regular dirt. No exotic stuff, no greenhouse, no special equipment. And the one thing they all have in common is simple. They reward you for leaving them alone instead of punishing you for it. That's the criterion. Laziness, tolerance. How much neglect can this crop take and still hand you a real harvest at the end of the season? We're counting down from number 20 all the way to number 1, and the ranking goes by exactly that. Degree of neglect each crop tolerates while still producing food worth eating. Number 20 is mildly hands-off. By the time we get down to the bottom of the list, we're talking about crops that practically plant themselves. Most gardening shows assume you've got every weekend free to fuss over a plot, and I'll tell you, a lot of folks just don't. This list is for those folks, and I'll warn you right now. By the time we hit number 1, you're going to be kicking yourself for not realizing what's been sitting in your kitchen this whole time. So let's get into it, starting at number 20 and working our way down to the laziest crop I've ever grown. Number 20, sunchokes, what a lot of folks call Jerusalem artichokes. These are knobby tubers that grow on a tall sunflower-looking plant, and once you put them in the ground, you've basically signed a long-term contract. I planted 6 tubers in the back corner of my yard in 2017, and I have not replanted that patch one single time since. Every fall, I dig up somewhere north of 30 pounds from the same square of dirt, and I leave plenty behind because anything I miss comes right back next spring. The reason they're so hands-off is they spread underground on their own. They shrug off drought, and the deer leave them alone. The only real warning I'll give you is to plant them somewhere you're okay with them staying forever, because pulling sunchokes out completely is a job and a half. But while sunchokes are stubborn underground, our next crop is stubborn in a way that'll outlast you. Number 19, horseradish. I'll tell you what, you cannot kill this stuff. I planted one root chunk about the size of my thumb back when my kids were in middle school, and that clump is still going strong over a decade later. I grate fresh horseradish every Thanksgiving from the same plant, and all I do is dig down with a spade in late October, twist off what I need, and walk away. The flavor on fresh grated horseradish, by the way, will absolutely clear your sinuses. Store-bought doesn't come close. Horseradish doesn't need fertilizer, doesn't need watering past the first month, and laughs at frost. Same warning as sunchokes, though. Pick your spot carefully, because once it's in, it's in. Now, the next one on the list takes some patience up front, but the payoff stretches across more than a decade. Number 18, asparagus. Here's the deal with asparagus. You got to wait 3 years before you really harvest, and that scares most folks off. But I'm telling you, if you can be patient for those first couple of seasons, an asparagus bed will feed you for 15-20 years easy. My bed is in year 11 right now, and I pull about 4 pounds of spears every spring without doing much more than throwing some compost on top in the fall. No replanting, no fussing. The crowns sit there underground all year and just push up new spears every April like clockwork. The trick is just not harvesting too aggressively in those first few years. After that, asparagus is about as set and forget as it gets. Well, almost. The next crop on the list takes neglect even better. Number 17, rhubarb. This one's a perennial powerhouse. I've got 2 crowns in the corner of my garden that have fed my family of 4 for years, and I've only divided them once in the last 8 seasons. Rhubarb actually likes being ignored. It doesn't want rich, pampered soil. It doesn't want extra water. And the colder your winter gets, the happier it is in the spring. I cut stalks from May through July, freeze what we don't eat, and then just let the plant die back on its own come fall. No mulching required, no covering, no nothing. The only thing you cannot do is eat the leaves, but the stalks will keep coming back longer than most marriages last. Now, the next item is the one that started this whole list, the one I told you about up top. Number 16, garlic. This is the bed I told you about at the beginning, the row I planted in October, walked away from all winter, and pulled 60 fat heads out of the following June. That experience right there is what got me thinking about lazy crops in the first place. Garlic is the model student of set-and-forget gardening. You break apart a bulb in fall, push the cloves pointy side up about 2 inches deep, throw some straw on top, and that is genuinely the entire job until summer. No watering through winter, no fertilizing. The cold actually triggers them to form bulbs, so the harder the winter, the better the harvest. I plant a row every October now without fail. And speaking of crops that do their own thing, the next one literally walks itself across the garden. Number 15. Walking onions, sometimes called Egyptian onions. These things are wild. They grow tall, then a cluster of little bulblets forms at the top of the stalk. The stalk gets too heavy, it tips over, and the bulblets root themselves wherever they land. That's why they're called walking onions. They replant themselves season after season. I haven't bought a green onion at the store in 6 years. I just snip what I need, and the patch keeps expanding on its own. You think this is lazy? Wait until you see what's sitting at the top of this list. And I'll give you a hint. It's already in your fridge right now. But for hands-off green onions, walking onions cannot be beat. The next crop is another perennial that beats winter to the punch every spring. Number 14. Sorrel. If you've never grown sorrel, you're missing out. It's a leafy green with a bright lemony flavor, and it's a perennial, which means one plant comes back every single year. Mine pushes up new leaves in early March, way before anything else in my garden is even thinking about waking up. One plant feeds my wife and me salads and soups all spring long, and the only thing I do for it is cut back the flower stalks if they get going. No fertilizer, no spraying, no replanting. It dies back in the heat of summer and comes right back in the fall. For something that gives you fresh greens before the last frost is even gone, sorrel is criminally underused. Now the next one is in that same perennial herb category, but it's been in American gardens forever. Number 13. Chives. Chives are about as low maintenance as a garden plant gets. I've had the same clump growing for over a decade now, and the only attention it gets is when I split it up every 5 years or so, just to give it some breathing room. I cut what I need for cooking, the plant grows it back within a week, and the purple flowers in spring bring in pollinators for the rest of my garden. Chives don't care if you forget about them. They don't care if it's dry. They come back through hard winters without a peep. The only thing they ask is that you don't till them up by accident. After that, the next item is one most folks plant in spring, and then just forget exists until late fall. Number 12. Parsnips. These are root vegetables that look kind of like white carrots, and they actually taste sweeter the longer you leave them in the ground. I sow my parsnip seed in spring, thin them out once, and then I do not touch that row again until November. The cold turns the starches into sugars, and you can leave them out there even into January under a layer of mulch and dig fresh sweet parsnips in the dead of winter. That's almost a year of hands-off growing for a crop that ends up tasting like candy roasted in the oven. Most people have never tried a homegrown parsnip, and that's a shame. The next root crop is one I personally got a serious yield from with almost zero effort. Number 11. Rutabaga. Now, rutabaga doesn't get nearly the love it deserves. I direct sow rutabaga seed in early July, thin once, and then I just walk away. They take all summer and fall to size up, and I dig them in November after a couple of frosts have sweetened them up. A few years back, I pulled 22 pounds out of a single 4-foot row, and the only thing I did between sowing and harvest was occasionally yank a weed if one got bold. Rutabaga stores in a cool basement for months. I've still got some from November sitting in my pantry in March. It's a serious calorie crop for almost no work. Now we're moving into the territory of vines that don't just tolerate neglect. They actually prefer it. Number 10. Winter squash, and specifically butternut. Butternut is the one I tell every new gardener to start with because the vines do most of the work for you. They sprawl out, they smother weeds with their own leaves, and they pretty much shade the soil into staying moist on their own. Back in 2020, I had 2 volunteer butternut vines come up out of my compost pile. I didn't plant them, I didn't water them, I didn't even know they were there until they started climbing the fence. By September, I'd pulled 11 full-size squash off those 2 vines. 11. From a compost pile I never touched. They cure on the counter for a couple weeks and then store all winter in a cool spot. The only crop with the same biology and even less attention from me sits at number 9. Number 9. Pumpkin. Same family, same lazy habit. I plant pumpkins in a forgotten corner bed every other year, usually a spot where I don't want to bother with anything fussy. I water them in once at germination, and after that, they're on their own. The vines find their own moisture, the leaves shade out the weeds, and by October I've got a stack of pumpkins for the porch and the kitchen. I've grown sugar pumpkins for pies and bigger jack-o'-lanterns for the grandkids, and the workload is identical, 0. Just give them space and walk off. Pumpkins want to grow. The only thing you really have to do is keep the deer off them in late summer, and even that's optional in my yard. The next crop on the list took me by surprise the first year I grew it. Easier than I expected, and one of only 2 crops on this list lazier than the pumpkin. Number 8. Sweet potato. I order slips in late spring, plant them in June after the soil is good and warm, and that is essentially the last thing I do until October. Sweet potato vines are aggressive. They cover the bed so completely that weeds give up. I don't water them past the first week unless we're in a real drought, and I don't fertilize them at all. In October, after the first light frost knocks the foliage back, I dig them up, and every year I'm a little surprised by how much is down there. I averaged about 30 pounds from a 10-foot row last season. The only crop on this whole list lazier than the sweet potato is the one we're saving for last, and you'll see why when we get to it. Number 7. Dry beans. This is the one that changed how I think about beans entirely. Most folks grow green beans, which means picking every 2 days for weeks. Dry beans are different. You plant them, you let them grow, and then you leave the pods on the vine until they rattle. No canning, no freezing, no blanching, no stress. I grow Jacob's cattle beans in a small block, and when the pods are crispy brown, I shell them out, let them air dry on a tray for a week, and pour them into mason jars on a shelf. They'll keep for years. 2 years ago, I shelled out about 6 pounds of dry beans from a 4x6 bed and didn't think about it again until soup season. Speaking of crops you dry right on the stalk, the next one is even simpler. Number 6. Popcorn, or dent corn if you want corn for grinding. I plant a small block in late May, and I do not touch it again. Corn is wind-pollinated, so you have to plant it in a block, not a single row. Once it's up, it shades itself out, and I let the ears dry right on the stalk through September and into October. When the husks are papery brown and the kernels are hard, I pull the ears, peel the husks back, and hang them in the garage for another month. Then, I shell the kernels into a jar. We pop popcorn from our own corn most weekends in winter. The grandkids think I'm a wizard. The next crop is one most American gardeners overlook, and it shouldn't be. Number 5. Leeks. I set leek seedlings out in May in a shallow trench, and I bury the trench gradually as they grow to keep the white shanks long. After June, I do nothing. Leeks are remarkably tough. They sit in the garden through fall, through hard frosts, and even through snow if you mulch them with straw. I dig leeks from October all the way through January in my Zone 7 garden. There is nothing better than going out in a snowy December and pulling up a fresh leek for soup. They take their time growing, but they don't care if you ignore them, and they hold in the ground like a built-in pantry. The next 3 crops all share that same cold tolerance, and the first one is one of my absolute favorites. Number 4. Overwintering kale, red Russian or winter boar are my 2 go-tos. I plant kale in late summer, around mid-August, and by the time the heat breaks, they're sized up and ready to start producing. Here's the thing nobody tells you about kale. It gets sweeter after frost. Single-digit nights don't kill these varieties. I've harvested kale leaves with snow on them, brushed them off, and brought them inside. Through January, my kale plants are still standing in the garden, still producing, still feeding us. I cut the lower leaves, and the plant keeps making more from the top. One bed of kale gives my wife and me greens from October through February with no effort beyond planting at once. The next crop is its first cousin in the cold hardiness department. Number 3. Collards. Same biology, same toughness, even more forgiving. 1 collard plant per person in your household will feed everybody. I usually grow 4 of them, and they outproduce what we can eat from October through hard winter. Collards laugh at frost. They stand there through ice storms looking like nothing happened, and the leaves just keep getting sweeter. I got a friend in North Carolina who's been harvesting from the same collard plants for 2 years running. They didn't even pull them up at season's end, and they kept producing. Collards are a true set-and-forget crop, and they're a calorie-dense, vitamin-loaded green that costs you almost nothing to grow. The next crop on the list might be the most generous plant I've ever put in the ground. Number 2. Swiss chard. If I had to pick one vegetable for a brand new gardener, somebody who's never grown anything before and is afraid they're going to kill it, I'd hand them chard seeds without thinking twice. I plant chard in May, and that same plant produces leaves into the following March in my Zone 7 garden. 10 months from one planting, you cut the outer leaves, the plant grows new ones from the center, and it just keeps going. It tolerates heat, it tolerates frost, it tolerates being ignored. Bright Lights or Ford Hook Giant, both have given me 10-month seasons. I get more chard out of one row than I can give away to neighbors. It's the closest thing to a perpetual vegetable I've ever grown. And now, the one I've been promising you, the laziest crop in the entire garden, and the one most folks already have sitting in their kitchen. And here it is, the one I think most folks are going to feel a little silly about once they hear it. Number 1, the sprouted potato. Specifically, any potato in your fridge or pantry that started growing eyes, those little white or purple sprouts coming out of the skin. Most folks throw those potatoes out. They look funny, they feel a little soft, and into the trash they go. What most folks don't realize is that each one of those eyes is already a fully formed baby plant with all the energy it needs to launch sitting right there in the tuber. You don't need seed potatoes from a catalog. You don't need special soil. You don't need anything except a corner of dirt and the willingness to bury something you are about to throw away. Let me tell you what happened in 2021. I had 3 russets sitting in my pantry that had gone way past the point of eating. Long sprouts, soft spots, the works. I was about to compost them, and on a whim I cut them into chunks instead, 1 eye per chunk, and I buried them 4 to 6 inches deep in a corner bed I'd basically given up on. No fertilizer, no extra water past the first week. I didn't mulch them. I didn't hill them up the way the books tell you to. I just walked off. About 90 to 100 days later, when the foliage yellowed and died back on its own, I went out with a fork and started digging. 14 pounds of potatoes from 3 grocery store russets I was going to throw in the trash. Here's why it works. Potatoes reproduce clonally. That means the eye on a sprouted potato isn't a seed, it's a clone of the parent plant, already alive, already programmed, already carrying its own starter battery of stored energy in the tuber. It doesn't need ideal soil. It doesn't need babying. It just needs to be in the ground. That's the whole reason this is the laziest crop on the list. The seed is already in your kitchen, already sprouting on its own, basically asking to be planted. 0 effort start, 0 effort finish. This is the one that reminded me gardening doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes the best crop in your garden is the one you almost threw in the trash. So those are the 20 set-and-forget vegetables I've personally grown in my own backyard, ranked from mildly hands-off all the way down to the laziest crop there is. My honest suggestion is, don't try to plant all 20 this year. Pick 1 or 2 from the list that fit your space and your season, get them in the ground, and see what works for you. If the sprouted potato story got you thinking, I've got a whole video on regrowing food from kitchen scraps that goes deeper into that idea. All right, that's how I do it. Give one of these a try and let me know which one earns a spot in your garden. I'll see you out by the fence.